Now then, I gave you very few directions, mostly because I was so worried, like, I didn't want to just talk at you, because I'm sure some of you recognize I have a tendency to do that sometimes, and not have enough time to watch it. It's my hope that you're able to glean some useful information from the documentary. It's fast, man. It moves from like movie to movie. We covered 10 or 15 years in that section that we watched, so like, it's pretty quick. I have a ridiculous amount of notes. I'm not bragging. That would be a really weird thing to brag about. But that's my way of saying, if no one has anything, you don't have to feel super pressured. This is our first real day of class, okay? I can start us off. But I am curious just to hear, like, did you guys, what struck you from that bit? Anything at all? Like, it covers a ton of stuff. Yes?
The transformation of how masculinity was looked at, like, in general, because from the beginning, you know, if you're talking about like Rambo, you know, this is a veteran, you know, the guns, the muscles, and you know, they.
Which Rambo?
The second.
Yeah, Rambo 2. Okay.
One, because the first one, because it wasn't as popular because he was more fragile.
Yeah, have you seen him?
Yeah, I've seen all of them.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's super different.
Yeah, no, I prefer the first one. Honestly.
Who doesn't? Yeah.
But that I was watching it and I was like, I've seen all these movies.
Yeah.
But no, like, you know, just personally, I like the change in that time period where, you know, you can have these masculine men and these muscles, and then it kind of starts to change as it goes on. You know, James Cameron is an amazing guy.
Yeah.
Jackie Chan definitely, and Eddie Murphy would add comedy to it, which would kind of lighten the mood, so it's not all just like super toxically masculine, which you know, I find is very endearing. And then as it goes on, you know, if we ended with aliens, you know, not only do you have a woman quite literally taking control, but you know, you don't have to have that comedic relief in the other movies where, you know, you don't have to worry about it getting too much, you know, too intense, you know, because when you have so many movies where it's like the same thing over and over, it starts to kind of dwindle and get so.
You kind of raise an interesting point that I honest to God hadn't thought about until now. I don't know if you meant to, but I'm gonna try to track what you said and the train of thought it put me on. Okay, you mentioned because I want to make sure it's not just a conversation with me and you. You mentioned the First Blood. That's what the first Rambo movie is called. It's kind of interesting. One point one of those guys makes is the second one is called Rambo First Blood 2. That all on its own is an interesting change, right? At one point they say First Blood was like a movie, like a drama. It is, like there's action stuff. We talked about this last class. But it's a drama. Like you're watching this character and like he's struggling. He's gone through a lot of shit, right? First Blood 2, Rambo, now all of a sudden there's it's a brand. And that, I think we're on up to Rambo 6 now or something? Something crazy? Yeah. It turns into its own. We made a joke last time too about the 30 or so Marvel movies. Same kind of thing. There's awesome movies in those, and there's also awesome moments in a lot of those movies. But it's turned into a brand now, right? So there's something else going on too. Changes things. Anyway, that's one idea that kind of came up. But alongside that, it is interesting if you track Rambo from like, I'm not going to be able to summon the year. It's either late 70s, I think it's late 70s actually. And then Rambo 2 is like mid 80s. In that time, you can almost track it with the transformation of this character. Very, very broken, and I don't think you call him weak at all. But according to the spectrum that you're in this hyper masculine, you saw Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was in his prime, like looking dude, he's probably weak according to that measurement, right? Because he is broken and yeah. So what do? Well, they fixed him for the sequel. He's ripped to shreds. He explodes that Vietnamese officer. I don't know if he's kind of quick. Mm-hmm. Like you see bits of him. Yeah. Like what the fuck is this? And they're talking about people in the theater. Like, yeah, I want that. I like it when the guy blows up. That was cool. So that is like, at least for the popular action movies, the trajectory they go on. What's interesting, the point you raised, I mean, this is why I like talking to you. You guys notice shit that, I don't necessarily. Kind because I love the buddy cop movies. 48 Hours, if you've never seen it. Beverly Hills Cop, dude, those movies are awesome. Eddie Murphy and Jackie Chan, but they allow them to insert this like comedic aspect. What's interesting to me, like with Eddie Murphy especially, not so much Jackie Chan, but you could argue there's like some othering going on there in it, well, for Eddie Murphy as well. But he's much slimmer, right? He's not white. He's all these things that aren't Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone. Like that, when we say toxically masculine, hyper masculine, the stereotype, it's a big buff white dude. Like that's kind of classically the thing, right? And so it's interesting when you get these other, it's like almost how do you work these other characters into the genre? One way it seems like they found to do it was through humor. Because even in 48 Hours, Nick Nolte isn't buff, but he's buff in terms of his personality. If you guys don't know who Nick Nolte is, that scene where Eddie Murphy's in the back of the car, he's like, tell me a story. He says, fuck you. That's Nick Nolte. He's the guy that tells him to fuck himself, right? But my point here is, I'm almost done, I promise. My point here that it seems like you're starting to raise is, you could almost argue, again, classically speaking, the Eddie Murphys, the Jackie Chans, in a very weird way, which we can talk about if you guys want to. They're probably looked at as more feminine, or at least not as masculine as an Arnold Schwarzenegger, a Sylvester Stallone, right? According to those stereotypes. But you make it work with humor. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to add on to that.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry for talking a lot. I'm just
You're
really
good.
interested in this.
You're good, man.
If I were to double down on that, I think a big part of it is the Americanization of it, because they mention all the time, you want to be American, when Reagan made it all political and everything.
Yeah.
I mean
Rambo, Jesus.
The classic American is a strong white guy. So when you get people from the East or people that aren't white, you know, they are seen as more feminine or more effeminate, which, you know.
Well, what's an interesting dovetail to that whole conversation when you get all the way to aliens is what they talk about, because that's more. I'm going to ask you guys this a lot in this class, and I apologize. Has anyone ever seen Alien, the first one? So good. It's so good. It's a horror movie. I mean, again, it's a horror movie. It's fucking terrifying. Aliens is an action movie. It's wild that the sequel is like a different kind of movie. Anyway, when they get to Aliens, she's also obviously feminized. She's a woman. That's kind of how it works. She's more masculine than women are usually depicted in those movies, but she's feminized. And what's interesting there, you can almost argue, because she's a woman, there's no room for humor. Like if there's I got a marker, hang on. It's almost like if there's a spectrum of this hyper-masculinity, stereotypical, all that stuff, right? And Arnold and Sly are like up here, okay? And then a little lower down, you have Jackie Chan and Eddie Murphy. Again, they get to stay, though, on the spectrum because they bring something else to it, right? They almost compensate for their like lack of like Conan level masculinity, right? With, well, they're funny, you know, they can stick around type of thing. They can work in the movie. For Ripley, which is Sigourney Weaver's character, it's almost like she can't be funny. She has to come all the way up from here because she's a woman, right? She has to bring it all the way up here to meet these guys, but because she's a woman, her character, I'll use her name, I'll use everyone else's fucking name. It's almost like she's not allowed to be funny because that would bring her down more. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
All right. Well, to you, does that make any sense to anyone else? A little bit? I thought drawing it might help because, you know, my brain can be stupid sometimes. But all I'm saying is that's an interesting point. Like thinking about just the 80s in general, because all these came out in the 80s. These are the masculine guys. These are the less masculine guys. But that's their like sort of ticket through the back door. For Sigourney Weaver, characters like her, she's the most masculine character in that movie, but she can only be so masculine, and so she can't tempt kind of getting downgraded with anything like that. That she's deadly serious in those movies. It's kind of interesting. Cool. Okay. Anybody else want to I thought we would dip our toe in. I didn't know we would, but that's cool. Anything else anybody noticed? For sure. I'm gonna shut up. Yes, sir.
I noticed that like in the movie there was like all this blood and stuff, and so like so they were like I guess intended for more mature audiences. But then when they made the action figures,
yeah,
it kind of gave like it gave an audience to the children too, like the children as well.
Yeah.
Gave them something to relate with, I guess. I don't know.
Well, and again, it's weird because on the one hand, all of these, especially anything in the defense of the studios, right? Because when we say they do something for money, it sounds gross because it is. If you only do something for money, like that's gross. You want them to have some kind of vision or some kind of idea, right? In their defense, some of these movies, like when Terminator 2 came out, I want to say it was the most expensive movie ever made at the time, type of thing. So like, you gotta pay for that shit, you know? Like you can't. It's fine for you to have a vision, James Cameron, but we need to get some of this back. You can't just. This isn't a charity. But to that point, you were mentioning that I had Terminator 2 toys. I wish I still had them, but you lose that stuff. I was a boy. I'm older than you, okay? But I was a child of the 80s. I was probably like 6 or 7. And I had a Terminator thing that was like this big, and he would say stuff. Like he said, "I'll be back." He said all this stuff from the movie. But he was all shot up, so like you could see his robot ribs, and his eye was cut out, and like super fucking violent. Honestly, like kind of messed up. But I was a kid, and I was like, this is awesome, man. So money's one part of that conversation, but the other part of that conversation, again, that you're kind of getting at, it's normalizing that violence, right? Because kids don't know. I try to be super careful with my kids. You can only do so much, but like, oh man. All right, this might be a minor spoiler, and I'm sorry. Does anybody give a shit about The Mandalorian, the new Disney Plus show? No? Okay. Do what?
I've already seen it all.
Okay, cool. Well, I figured if anyone did, they'd seen it. We don't have time. My boys are mostly through the first season, and we saw the episode, I think it's the penultimate one in the first season, where they steal the Baby Yoda thing back, and they kill that pig guy, right? That guy's dead in the desert, like shot him to death. They do that off screen, but it shows him being dead and then like running off with the baby. It's awful. My son, the 5-year-old, is like, what happened to him? Oh, fuck. They got him, man. He's like, what? You got him? What? They got him. They'll go get there. It's gonna be all right. I couldn't. Like, they shot him to death, and he's never coming back. Like, you can't. But I'm saying, like, when you sell stuff like that specifically to kids, right? The action figures, whatever else, you're just kind of saying, yeah, fuck it, you deal with that in your head. Like, I saw those movies. My dad, I think I mentioned this last time. My dad showed me the Predator movies when I was little. And again, I don't know how many of you have seen those. They are not children's movies. But again, you could argue maybe, and this is hard for me because I'm from it. This would be more for you guys. I wonder if it's almost a hallmark of that 80s, 90s culture. This idea that, are we just as a people not really bothered by violence? Like, we celebrate it, but even when we don't, it's almost like, that's fine. Like, what is that about? Is it tied to this? I'm honestly asking, by the way. Why doesn't violence bother us?
I think nowadays it's tied to experiences.
Is what?
Tied to, like, experiences, like personal experiences.
Well, what do you mean?
Like things that happens around us. So we see the movies like.
But not like in the movies.
Well, I mean, of course, in the movies they over exaggerate.
Yeah.
It's still.
I'm super curious what you mean. I'm trying to, like, what do you mean we experience it?
I don't want to say experience, like, see, like, in person. Sometimes you can see it in person, but I say this on the news or something.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay, so these days, I feel like it. So, we're so inundated with information. We probably are like more desensitized to stuff like that, I guess. Is that what you're saying? Okay. I'm with you there. But again, to be fair, like that's these days. And I know you guys weren't there. Like, I was barely there. I was born in 1986. I know. I'm a year younger than the Nintendo. I know. Anyway, we didn't have that back then, though. Like, we had the news, but we didn't have. I mean, I made a joke about VHS earlier. There was no internet. You know, there was no constant update of stuff. Is your hand up now? Oh, please go.
I kind of like wrote down a lot of the same stuff about the masculinity and things like that, but I basically wrote like how a lot of it was just so influential during these times that children can't help but notice it or can't help but be a part of it. Like a lot of them that were talking were like, yeah, when I was a little kid, my dad pointed this out, or yeah, when I was younger, my dad bought me this from the movie, or yeah, when I was younger. You know, like some of these movies like made so much money and became so popular that it kind of turned into like a family thing, that families would go and watch it, or families would enjoy it kind of together. So children kind of really couldn't be away from it. And I guess during these times, like in the very beginning, they said how like they made it real action stunts, like it was a real thing. People really were blowing up cars.
Yeah.
I think like a lot of that stuff wasn't stuff people saw often, so to see it
Sure.
on TV and just the kind of technology, people were so amazed by it.
That's true.
I think that had a lot to do with like having children be involved, or children seeing it, or parents being so surprised that it's like, hey, I want to show you this really, really cool thing.
You're talking about spectacle.
Yeah.
The element of spectacle. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I didn't want to use too much. Your idea about the experience that really, I was going to say my dad, for instance, when I grew up, I saw all of those movies, I saw all the action movies, and his thought was, if I was watching these as a child, like a 3-year-old watching Rambo, and being shown all this blood and violence, that I would grow up to be tough. I'm not. But I think a big part of it, you know, like we were talking about earlier, about like, you know, the masculinity in it is so like, so intense. So, you know, more than anything else.
It's over the top for sure.
Like in the political age of everything going on, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to go on with war, you know, whatever. So there may be the chance of exposing all this to kids. You know, maybe it'll make them tougher. Maybe they'll be more inclined to allow this violence to happen in the future. You know, I mean, like we look at violence now and we're like, well, violence happens. I mean, we don't want it to happen, but I mean, I grew up looking at all these violent movies, and you know, like if I saw like violence, like, you know, kids fighting each other, or like Jerry Springer, you know, the Maury Povich show, all these things that you know kids aren't supposed to see but are marketed to kids. You know, it's sad, but I look at I look at a lot of violence and I'm like, well, I mean, it could be worse, you know. And I think that, you know, just normalizing that kind of like idea of, you know, to be masculine, to be strong, and to allow this and to overcome this violent tendency is what I think may have been, like, inadvertently what they did. You know, it's not like they were trying to do it, but I feel like that's like a result. Well,
I think part of it too is kind of what you guys are all dancing around anyway. I'm going to try to get this straight because I have two ideas in my head at the same time. What's up? Sorry, now something in my eye. It's basically, I don't know, I mean, I'm sure in some cases somebody wants to like toughen you up or whatever. Maybe that's why my dad had me watch all those crazy movies too. I couldn't tell you. He's a damaged person. But the other way to think about, and again, this is any movie, this is anything we make, right? These are the stories we tell ourselves about us. And again, I come back to the second Rambo. That one guy, there's so many people, I can't keep them straight, but it's a dude with glasses. That's fucking, it's not, I know it's not Guess Who, but anyway, he says something like, hang on, it's really smart.
Actions speak louder than words.
No, he says, America needed a boost of confidence. He said the good feeling of being American at another point. He said, basically, a different guy, but also smart, said something like, you know, the first Rambo was about losing Vietnam. The second one is about winning it.
It kind of gave this like superheroes.
Yes. Well, to get there, we're going to get there. But real quick, I just want to be clear. If you guys know your history, did we win the Vietnam War? No. No, we did not. We did not. And it was a huge black eye for the country. Like we had never lost a war before Vietnam. We had never lost a war. And it's not like we got beat. I mean, it was in Vietnam. It sucks to be in Vietnam, but we still lost that war. And many people have argued movies like First Blood come out of that sense of defeat. Rambo is in the first one is broken and just sad and just trying to deal with a world that doesn't make any sense to him. And you could kind of read a lot of the anxieties of that time in him, right? First Blood 2 comes around. We're done with the truth. I'm not interested. We're going to win Vietnam. We're going to blow it up with a grenade on an arrow for some reason. Right? It's ridiculous. That is actively ridiculous. But we wanted that, you could argue. And again, going forward into the 90s, the 2000s, where we are now, these are still the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. So it's what we wanted, is what we want to see about us. We are this thing, or we are this way, you could argue. And a lot of times that has something to do with violence too. Like do we want to think we're that violent, or do we think we're that violent, or do we? I'm not sure. I don't have an answer for that last part. I just want to bring it to your attention. What time is it, by the way?
It is.
Because that's how I tell
4:40.
Oh, okay. You guys did a good job. I appreciate it. You did pretty well. And we're basically out of time, so okay. What we're going to do going forward. I write everything down because my memory is not trustworthy. We're going to talk about the first paper next time. Don't freak out. Okay. The prompt is up on CourseNet. I recommend you looking at it. But we will talk about it. More importantly, much more importantly than that, actually, you need to watch Rocky. Right? I know some of you have seen it before, some of you haven't. I'm wildly curious to see what the people who haven't seen it, what you think about it. Again, I will say it's not necessarily what you expect, especially early. Just roll with it. I do think you'll like it if you give it a chance. But we're going to be talking about that, looking at maybe some scenes on Wednesday. So you have to have that movie watched. Okay? We don't have school on Monday. I assume you know that. You guys are pretty good at knowing when we don't have school. So, do you guys have any questions for me? I know. All right. Thank you guys. I'll see you in a week.